Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl.
Today we have Michelle Hawkins with us. Say hello, Michelle.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Michelle is an Online Great Books member, and we were talking, as one does in Slack, about music, and we decided that we needed to do a show about music. You know, the folks at St. John's College do seminar over classical music, and I've not been part of that, but I've read about it. Emmett has told me a little bit about it, our friend Emmett Penny, and I thought, gosh, we need to do some of that.
Yeah, I have some friends that went to Thomas Aquinas College, which is like the Catholic St. John's, and I think they had to write a sonata to graduate.
Really?
Something. They had to write some little bit of music.
Wow.
Which I think is neat.
When we open St. Hambrick's, we're going to write limericks and a bathroom stall doggerel. No sonatas.
It's better than nothing.
Yeah. Today, we said, hey, let's do something about some sort of music. And then Michelle said, okay, how about we read Beethoven's Heiligenstadt Testament and then maybe discuss Eroica, his Symphony number 3, the Bonaparte Symphony. So I said, okay, I don't know how to do any of that.
This little tiny bit of classical music that you had us do. I think what is it, an hour and 10 minutes?
Yeah. It's long. Yeah. Sorry about that. It's one of the longest.
It's fine because Scott is we kind of trade books to read, and he'll tell me to read something that's 10 pages, and then I say, let's do Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Which is 1,200. And
yeah. So
that's fine. I thought this was an interesting project. I don't think anybody knows how to listen to this kind of thing. And I especially am excited about it given our approach at Online Great Books, where you don't have to read the history of music. You don't have to read the Oxford Companion. You don't have to know German history, or at least not yet. You know, go listen to the thing, encounter the thing in its thingness, I guess. And I wonder what you think of how to do that, because there's so many people. I can't listen to classical music. I don't understand it. And they'll go listen to Justin Bieber instead.
Mm-hmm. Oh, my God. Mm-hmm. I can't understand that. Like, I know the words that come out of his mouth, but I don't understand it at its base.
Well, I kind of have a lot of thoughts about that. So I have this running theory that we're kind of living in actually a post-musical culture now. You guys talk about living in a post-literate culture, and we're definitely in a sort of a post-musical or musically literate culture because, you know, music education has kind of been taken out of most schooling, compulsory or not. And so people are not growing up with the same musical soup or musical atmosphere that used to be the case. And so it is harder to listen to these pieces of music because you do need to have a little bit of context, because they are complex. And so it can be hard to enjoy something that's complex when you have no context to put it in and no exposure. Does that make sense?
Sure. But how do you go from zero to able to taste what's there? I'm going to make a very bad analogy.
I like that.
So I partook in a chili contest.
When was this?
This is that was a while back. My son is part of a boys group, and they got together and they had a chili cook-off for all the dads. And so I cooked just a standard Karl chili. It's just one can of peppers and of the smoked jalapenos and a bunch of good meat, and none of them could eat it. It was too spicy.
Well, it was in Illinois.
I know. It was an anonymous thing. I was walking around the room. That one's so hot. That's too hot. Well, no, it was glorious. I mean, for me, once you get accustomed to the spiciness, then you can take, I think a habanero is a really flavorful pepper. But you have to get over a threshold before you can get it. So here's my analogy. Beethoven is a spicy pepper.
Yes.
And if you come in fresh, you're going to burn your mouth.
How many Carlville units is the Symphony 3?
Millions.
Millions. Yeah, I think you're right. Have you ever turned on the radio? Like, I don't know, does anybody listen to the radio anymore? I remember turning on the radio. I'd get in the car, start it, and you take off, and you get to the first stop sign. You turn the radio on, and it would be in the middle of a song, and it would just be noise. And then it took me a moment to like find the downbeat, and then I don't know, my ear would like acclimate to the key or something, and then you could like, oh, we're right in the middle of the stupid Leonard Skinner song, and then I would recognize it. Right, but if you just jump in and there's no context, you're not moored in it in any way. It just sounds like noise. So for me, I started listening to this thing, particularly the first movement. The first time I listened to it, it was mostly noise. And by the way, it wasn't the first time I've heard this before. But the first time I did a close listening to it in the last week, it was mostly noise. But when I found the main theme, which is kind of built around this triad, when I found that main theme, you could hear it over and over again, and it rotates throughout the different voicings of the thing. Like it'll be in the violins, and then the oboe will do it, and then the horns will do it. And once you can find that, then you're kind of oriented inside this song, this music, and then I could find out what the heck was going on, and I could hear other things. You got to kind of hear the first main. My grandmother would say, you got to hear the mainest thing before you can hear the other main things. And so when I found that, you've got your piano there. Let me put you on the spot. Can you give us that little triad, that little main theme from that first movement?
Sure.
That beautiful note, that little that flat. Once you hear that chunk, I think you can hear the rest of the song, or start to hear the rest of the song. But until you hear that, it's a lot.
It's very true. I mean, so can I make a confession?
Please. I like
so
that.
So I haven't listened to this symphony in 20 years, probably. And so I pulled a Karl. And when I said we're gonna do this, it's a mini Karl. I did a little mini Karl. I said, we're gonna talk about the Eroica. I haven't listened to that thing in 20 years. Wait, I'm gonna listen to all 9 symphonies. In order, in linear progression, and see what happens. So I listened to the first and the second, and admittedly, they're kind of boring. They're not super interesting. I don't know. We could argue about that. And then you get to the Eroica, and it's different. There's something significantly different about it. But the first time that I listened to the Eroica, this year, by the time it got to the very end, I was mad. Because I just was so mad at the way that he ended it. Right. I thought it was so stupid. Like, what?
Yeah. This
is your heroic ending? I don't get it. I don't understand. And so then I'm thinking, okay, I gotta go back to the beginning and figure out what the heck just happened and why did he make me so mad?
Yeah. Let's talk about why it's different. I did the same thing. The first 2 symphonies are half the length of this.
Yes.
To the best of my ear. So I got to come clean. I can play the French horn. I can read some music. I don't play it super well. It's been a long time since I've blown on one. Put my hand up that bell. But I know a little bit about what's going on, and I actually followed along with the score here. And I didn't follow along in the score with the first and second symphonies. There are several more instruments in this. It's a lot more lush. There's at least one more horn. I think they're in 2 or 3 different keys. They didn't have the double horn at that time, so I think there's like a C horn, and I don't know, there's 3 of them. I think they've added an oboe. I don't know. There's several more instruments in here. It's a lot lusher, and then it's twice as long. There's a lot more range of emotion displayed in this thing than in the first 2. And, we can compare it to the first 2, but I think another good comparison is just to everything else that came before it. Like, this is the birth of the modern symphony, probably.
Well, it's the birth of the romantic, right? So he's still staying within that framework or that structure of the symphony, but now, bringing in that romantic aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask, can dig in a little bit? Because romantic doesn't mean Hallmark Channel.
Right.
does not. No.
Okay, so for our dear listeners, when we talk about romantic, what do we mean?
Well, in general, the romantic movement is about feelings. So it's not necessarily about romantic love or attraction to another person in that kind of a way, but it is about the expression of your feelings. So it's actually a reaction to the Enlightenment and that sort of hyper rational, hyper reason based thinking, and this is feelings based.
So if we wanted to do examples, Enlightenment thinker par excellence, that's French, would be Kant.
Oh my God. Or Bach. Or the Bach fugue, which is just flat and mathematical and symmetrical.
I have to defend Bach now.
I like him too.
Not symmetrical.
The fugue is, I mean, it's geometrical. How about that? Maybe not symmetrical.
Uh-huh.
Can't we accept that? Will we swallow that pill that I think it's geometrical?
Sure. I think it's math in time.
It's mathematical, yeah, for sure.
So I love Bach. So for me, listening to Bach is I can sit there and put it on, and it's not making a demand on me that I feel a certain way. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of...
It's very Calvinist.
You know, I'm a little bit of a musician, but I don't do it... Well, occasionally they pay me, but not very much. So all my words might be odd. But for me, it's like a building with lots of open space and windows and a very neat layout, but it's all just kind of open and light comes in and you can let your mind go wherever. It's very productive of thought for me to listen to a fugue or listen to the well-tempered clavier. It's not making me feel a certain way. And I queued up Symphony No. 3. I've listened to it like 4 times in the last 2 days. And today, and we're getting to that second movement and that little major section, like 2/3 of the way through. It's all in C minor, I think, and then it goes into C major. But then he takes it back and he goes to that funeral melody again, and I'm getting a little choked up. Yes, you know, he's playing games with me.
Yes. Well, so I had a couple thoughts about that. You know, I'm thinking, so does he go to major because it's sort of the obligatory thing that you do when you're in minor? You go eventually to the relative major because it's a place that you can go and that they always go there? Or is he trying to say something more about, you know, mourning or death or, you know, the hero that we lost? What has died and what's being represented?
Yeah,
like
a rebirth, right? In that funeral dirge, I think. Okay, we're getting too heady. You want to listen to a little of this?
Yes, please.
Michelle, will you want to state that theme again? And we'll listen to a little chunk, just to maybe the first minute of the first movement.
Sure.
So listen to this, guys. And then when we play Beethoven, listen for it again. There we go. So we'll get about a first minute, maybe a minute and a half, something like that, of Symphony No. 3 in E flat major, Opus 55. It's Beethoven's Eroica. This is the first movement. So let's get it. Let's hear.
For me, my sense of listening to that is its playfulness. None of this stuff exists before the guy puts it down paper and then gets a bunch of musicians to record it. None of it has to exist. It's all just kind of floating out there. And so here's my theme. Now I'm going to play with it. Come along for the ride.
That's some of that weird Karl Platonic stuff. Oh, it's just kind of floating out there, and then he puts it down like it's an opera, or like the music existed, and then he was a conduit that brought it from the realm of of forms onto paper and into your ear hole. Is that what you think?
No, actually, I didn't think that then. I think he's well, okay. I sort of think that. Michelle, are you also a Platonist, like all sensible people?
Probably not. No. I don't think that there are these things that exist outside of reality necessarily. You know, like there's the dogness of a dog that's not actually part of a dog. Like, no.
Yeah. All right. But, okay. Music. I think there might be some eternal bits there.
Well, so that's an interesting question, right? So where does music come from? What is music? You can really get into some...
Well, let's do the basic thing. So music is sound, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a particular kind of sound. So my voice right now, this is not music.
No.
There's not a discernible pitch too much. I mean, I can sing a little higher and a little lower, but I'm not holding a pitch. So there's this thing, pitch in music, where it vibrates at a steady state and it's perceived as a particular kind of a sound. Right?
Correct.
You can correct me on all the technical words for this.
No, that's correct. Yeah.
And then there's octaves and fifths and then there's harmonies. There's relationships between these different kinds of things called musical notes. That's where I think the forms are.
Well, so I have this theory, right? So that music is an expression of reality, right? Because it's a way of expressing something that already exists in physical form, if that makes sense, right? Because vibrations or the potential for vibrations always exist. So maybe that's the Platonic aspect of it. Mm-hmm. But humans over time have discovered more and more aspects of the physics of vibration, right? Or the physics of sound. And in the Western world, the way that's developed over time is that they figured out a way to divide up the octave. So the octave is just this fundamental thing in the sound, right? Right? You can hear those sounds kind of melt into each other, right? And they're fundamentally the same pitch, or we think of them as the same pitch because we don't hear it as two really different things. But as soon as I play something else, can you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Right? Definitely those two sounds are not melting into each other, right? Not being subsumed.
Right. Yeah. And so if you want to get into the Platonic mathematics of it, I used to do this sort of thing. If you take your graphing calculator and add the sine waves together, octaves add really nicely.
Yes, they're just doublings.
Yeah. When you play what you played, which was just a half step.
Oh, from here to here?
Major seventh. Right?
Yes.
I'm testing my ear.
Very nice.
Very good.
They don't add up quite as much. So there's little beats that you can hear. And if you're only a little bit out of tune, you can actually hear the beats where the two frequencies are interfering with each other. So they interfere with each other or complement each other according to rules of mathematics. In other words, Mr. Scott Hambrick, Platonic forms. That's what I think.
So he has this this theme that's built out of these triads. What's a triad? Play that triad for us, Michelle. Yeah, the three notes inside that one particular octave. In this case, it's E flat major, I think, right? And he uses those three notes to build that little simple melody. And that melody's loose enough and simple enough that he can do all kinds of things with it for about 59 minutes.
Yeah,
it's so pleasing and it's so conformable to the ear and the human nature that it seems like a thing of nature to me.
Well, because the triad is actually revealed within the note itself. So
revealed.
There's the
Whoa.
Property.
That's a big word, Michelle.
Because of the physics of sound, right? So every fundamental note that exists, once you start that vibration into motion, you also trigger higher vibrations, higher frequencies that are
overtones,
complementary. Yeah, the overtone series, right? And the first different note that you get from the fundamental note is the fifth, right? So you get, and eventually, well, actually, you'll get the octave first, but eventually you get that note, right? And all of Western music is basically this tug of war between the first note and the fifth note.
That's why rock and roll loves the power chord.
right? That's Western music. But one of the innovations or discoveries in Western music is the addition of the third, which is the next partial that you hear in the overtone series. So you get... Right? And that is found in every single note that exists if you were to analyze the overtone series.
Yeah, so you can make a tone generator, hook up to an oscilloscope, and you can actually see these waves appear on the oscilloscope. And your ear is more sensitive than you would think, and your ear can sense those things. So when you build a chord of those thirds, it's very pleasing.
I just want to give an evil laugh right now because this is all, playing into my clutches of Platonism everywhere. Music is natural. It's not something...
It's not arbitrary.
Right. It's not arbitrary.
It's a discovery. I think it's a discovery of what already is. It's not arbitrary.
Yeah. That's what I meant.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Beethoven has such a keen sense of that which already is.
Yeah.
Which seems easy, right? But it's really not. Right? To be deeply rooted in that reality and be able to be so keenly aware of what it already is, and then be able to select from his toolbox of elements and produce this thing that puts it all in front of you in this lovely, beautiful human way is why he's so good. And by the way, he's doing all of this and his ears are ringing, and he never gets to hear the work. He never even hears this thing. It's all a work of his intellect. He can't even try it. He can't even be like, I want to play this and hear it and see how it goes. Can't do it.
Yeah. He's doing memories of sound. I want to dig in a little bit more. Michelle, do you happen to have the score handy?
Yeah.
There's that part. My favorite part of movement 1 is when he starts hitting us with the repeated, I guess, sforzando chords.
6 of them. Boom, boom, boom. Those?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not going to play those crazy chords. Are you talking about the one where it's just a weird 5 chord where it sounds wrong?
No.
Yeah.
There's a moment where he plays, I think it's this. He goes,
He's like, that's in like the third movement where there's the dominant over the major. Is that the one?
Well, I'm thinking first movement, and I think that might be the spot where he hits you with a few hammer. Yes.
But it sounds wrong. Like there's a wrong note in there.
Uh-huh.
It's weird because it has this in there. Why is that in there, right? This would make sense. That makes sense. Right? But
I love it. I get chills. It's like it's weird. Beethoven, he's doing things to me, and I'm letting him do it. Bach just is like, this is another weird analogy. Bach is your if the music were dating, okay? Bach is the girl that sits out on the porch with you while your parents are inside and the window is open and you have a nice chat over tea and cookies. And Beethoven's music is that girl that, that she's a little forward.
You can't take Beethoven home to mom. Is that what you're saying?
No, because this symphony's going to grab you and do things to you, whether you want it to or not. And it's going to hit you with those hammer beats and building up the dissonance. So we talked a little bit about octaves and thirds and fifths and how they kind of go together. A dissonance, can you explain to us a little bit of what dissonance is and what he's doing with that chord you just played? And why it strikes us so weird?
I guess it's the notion of tension and release. And in music, we call that dissonance versus consonance. So the most basic thing in Western music is that, you have a place that you're calling home. And home feels really nice, right?
The root.
I'm home. Right? And then you can go to the 5 chord. There's just that little bit of... Does that feel like home?
No, if you stop there, I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight.
Right? No, right? And also just...
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason why that's the Simpsons...
theme.
Whatever you call it. Theme. So you're here, right? I'm disturbing you, right? Because I haven't resolved it. Tension. Release. Right? That's kind of what all of Western music is based on, that notion of tension versus release. And the more notes that you add that are more tense, we consider that to be more dissonant.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the payoff is much bigger, right? Because there's so much tension that makes the release so much sweeter.
And Beethoven is able to, he starts off, this starts off not dissonant at all. And then then he ratchets up that tension, and then he resolves it a little bit. And then he ratchets it up more, and then he resolves it a little. He never lets it all go away. Really, maybe till the end of the fourth movement, where Michelle's really disappointed. My weirdo guitar teacher, Dick Gordon Jr., all music is really the management of tension in the listener. Well, I think that's true, and Beethoven's the best at it.
I don't know that he's the best at it, but he's...
Who else? Who would be?
Fight.
Well, because then you're implying he's the best composer of all time, and I'm not willing to go there. But
okay. Who is?
I don't know, but there are ones that I personally like better.
Who's that?
You know? Brahms.
We're making you make declarations.
Brahms? Tchaikovsky.
Okay.
I like
so
the
pretty.
Russians. I'm partial to the late Russian romantics. I'm not saying Beethoven's bad, and he definitely, he's a monument in music, but I don't think music evolution stopped with Beethoven.
Yeah, I could go with you there. I'm a fan of the Russians myself.
Conspiracy.
Yeah. So for me, as you go through, if you guys who are listening go through and listen to first movement, in my score, it's like measure 276. He's been hitting us with these hammer beats. And they're a little bit dissonant, and then they're a little bit more dissonant, and then they're a lot dissonant, and then he hits you with a bunch of them. And some recordings, like I think the Haitink one, he really, really slows down to hit those. And it's like, how much more can he take you away from home? How much more can he work you up? Beethoven, for me, he does this thing a lot where he finds something that he likes, and he's just it's like doing it once isn't good enough. I'm going to do it again, and then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it 10 more times, and then I'm probably going to recap it later. It's just, it works me up. This music, I can't listen to it passively. It really, I want to bang on things. You're speaking of Russians and romantic music. I remember when I was a kid, I was very, very impressed that Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Oh, yes.
There was a riot at the premiere.
Yes. Can you imagine?
Yeah, that's so punk rock. I'm thinking, how could you listen to this music so passionately that it would cause a riot? I think that would be
just
great.
The idea that these sort of aristocratic folks got so worked up into a lather that they started, punching each other. It's fantastic.
I want tickets to that.
You said that you can't passively listen to this, and I think if somebody's new to trying to listen to this kind of music, that's the mistake. It's not background music. It's not. You really have to sit down, put your headphones on, and listen to this thing if you want to wring even some of the good out of it, at least, let alone all the good if you can. And you have to listen to it multiple times. You can only get first listening stuff out of the first listen, and it requires more. And it holds up, though.
Yeah. Well, we were chatting about music on the Slack channel, and some people were saying, well, yeah, I like classical music. I like to play it when I'm reading. Okay. But if it's really good, I don't know that you can read to it.
Definitely not. Oh, at least not for me. But I have a hard time ignoring music in general. Unless it's really bland, then I suppose. But
Enya to read by. I don't think it's a good idea to use it for background music because it's going to train you to not listen to it actively, and it wasn't meant for that. It wasn't meant for that. So I don't think that's a good habit to get into. Like if you want to develop a bigger, better, deeper appreciation of this stuff, it's best to not treat it as background music because you will be conditioning yourself to treat it just like that. And it's not this foreground thing.
I was just going to say, going on this Beethoven binge the last couple of weeks, it does change you. It does have an effect. We went out for dinner last night and we're sitting in a restaurant and they're just playing, whatever pop music. And after having Beethoven in my ears, for hours over the last few weeks, you listen to it and you go, wow, it just sounds like kindergarten. Like what is that? It's just, it will change your ears and it will change your perspective on just what's possible.
Yeah, there's so many layers to it. That theme that we played at the beginning gets turned around upside down, inside out, major, minor. There's response themes to it. I think it probably comes back in the fourth movement a little bit. He's taking an idea and doing a million things with it. It is in-depth and wonderful. It's a big onion, and there's just not that much to other music. It's kind of like when you join us at Online Great Books and you read the sorts of stuff that we read, you might ruin yourself for small talk. If you're hanging out with Aristotle and Plato and Thucydides, and then somebody wants to talk about the football game, like, okay. Okay, I guess they played a game. How was it? But it's just, there's so much more there. There's more there, right? The old joke about Los Angeles, there's no there. There's a lot of there in this. It's worth the effort, but it's a hard sell for these people coming in from zero. They're used to three chords.
That's what I mean, that sort of post-musical culture that we're in, because most of the music that you hear now is just on a musical level, and not even trying to judge it as good or bad. It's very simple. It's just on a very, very simplistic level. And so, yeah, trying to go from that to Beethoven is a really big leap.
Michelle, if somebody wanted to, maybe they're convinced by our little dive into the first movement of this, and they want to get more into it, what's a good way to do it? Because if you flip on, say, a Mahler symphony or Brahms, who's like Beethoven Part 2 for me, somebody said to him once that he sounded like Beethoven, and I think he was very offended.
No, he said, "Oh, you think?" Like yeah, of course, because his first symphony, anyway.
No, what?
A ripoff of the first. So there's a part of the melody, I believe it's of the first symphony by Brahms, which is kind of a ripoff of the Ode to Joy, or it's definitely an homage to the Ode to Joy. And so somebody said, "Sounds like the Ode to Joy," and he's like, "Oh no, really? You noticed?" Like, duh.
So Sonny Stitt was a jazz saxophone player. He sounded a lot like Charlie Parker, and somebody came in and heard him play and said, "You're just ripping off Charlie Parker." And he's like, he hands him the saxophone. "If you think it's so easy, you do it." I mean, after Beethoven, you're going to be like Beethoven is not a bad thing at all. And Brahms is wonderful. But if you dive into something like that, fresh off of listening to country music or pop or whatever it is you listen to, I love country music, but there's more there. And if you come from scratch, it might be too much. You might not notice anything. It might just sound like Scott was saying at the beginning, just like a bunch of noise, because you don't have any bearings. It doesn't have a beat. There's no snare drum. There's no vocal. Some of them have vocals. But how do you go from zero to something?
I think you need a little bit of a bridge, right? You need to develop a little bit of context. Maybe you start with Mozart instead of Beethoven, because Mozart is more straightforward. And so if you're just trying to be able to hear melodies and notice them and follow them, Mozart leads you very nicely. He's not trying to trick you. So that might be an easier place to start.
So if Bach is the girl who sits on the porch demurely and Beethoven is the girl you can't bring home to mama, what's Mozart's
Mozart's easy.
His porridge is just right. Yeah, I think you have to sit down with whatever it is, and on the first listening, know that you're not going to, you might not grok the thing, you might not get it, and you need to see if you can pick out some of these melodic themes. Michelle's played the little Triad theme over and over here for this third symphony. You need to find that, and then you're going to find, within this movement, you're going to find that it has kind of 3 or 4 parts. 3 or 4 kind of noticeable chunks where the theme or the style or the feel of the thing changes, and you can sort of identify where those things are, and then maybe go back and listen to it again, and then see what happens to that original theme as it moves through those different sort of chunks. There's sub-movements.
Yeah.
You have to start assembling it in your mind, because it's very difficult to hold this whole thing in your mind as you listen to it the first time or the second time or the third time.
I think if you can, even just sing a little bit of it or whistle, if you can think, well, what did I just hear? And do a little bit of the melody, for me, that's a good way to try to grasp it rather than letting it be noise. What did you hear? Did you hear something? Maybe just 3 notes. That would be that would be an approach. I also thought, Michelle, I was wondering, for the average listener who's not maybe a musician, I was thinking, like, if you just had a scale, if you just knew what a scale was, it might be a big help. Just to know how music is structured, that this is what notes are. In other words, you learn what that is, and then you're able to hear it a little bit better. Just like the Sound of
the
Music
do-re-mi.
thing, the do-re-mi song.
Well, that's what I mean, right? So the whole symphony is predicated on, here we are, right? We're here, and it's the fight between this and that. And this wants to go back there, right? So if you kind of have that in your mind, you will hear that over and over and over again in the symphony in different keys, that tension.
And it might be hard the first few times, but once you get that, then you'll start to see more, I think.
You know what, though? If you go to the end of every single movement, this is one thing Beethoven really does. He hits you over the head with it. He will hit you with 5-5-5-1, 5-5-5-1. Like, he will just do it over and over again. 5-1, 5-1, 5-1.
Yeah.
So there's no way that you can miss it if you skip to the very end of a movement, because he will just hammer you with it over and over.
Yeah, he's not subtle, not usually. You want to listen to a minute of movement 2?
Yeah.
Michelle, I'm going to ask you, can you play the violin part? Dun, da, 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 dun, 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 da, 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 da,
No, leave it.
You can edit out my singing, but that's... I'm probably on the wrong note.
Where is it?
Right at the beginning of movement 2 in the first violin.
Very sad.
Oh, that little simple thing. It's just getting me right now.
You will hear a little bit of this. Right? Because it is a funeral. He actually does something like that here.
Yeah, and so he's going to take that main theme, if you have that in your ear, and you listen to the second movement, it's going to go all over the place in different instruments and different modulations, and it's going to have a response theme to it, and it's going to be done in the major section a little bit. If you just have that little bit, if you could hum it even just as badly as I did, I think when you listen to it, you'll do it better. So I'm going to cue up about a minute of this. All right, so I hate to stop it there, but that was, you hear it, that theme in the strings, and then you hear it repeated in the oboe, I think.
And Beethoven seems to always use the oboe when he's trying to do something that's really introspective, or it almost seems like it's like that's Beethoven is the oboist. He always puts something really poignant in the oboe.
Such a weird instrument. You ever play that thing?
No.
Oh my gosh.
I'm actually a flute player, and so we sit next to the oboists.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Well, now, if you were ever in a band or an orchestra, dear listener, instruments have personalities. The people who play them.
The oboe is the platypus of the orchestra.
So do you know how trumpet players greet each other? Because that's what I am. You just shake hands and say, I'm better than you.
It's true. The trumpet player is the lead
True.
guitarist.
I can play higher than you. Yeah.
Right. You have range contests before the rehearsal. But the oboe, generally in a high school band, because it is a difficult instrument to do, technically difficult, a bad oboe sounds like a duck. A good oboe is marvelous, but a bad one, just the scope.
It has two reeds that vibrate against each other. It doesn't really have a mouthpiece. It's a double reed. And the bassoon is the mature oboe. It's the baritone oboe, and it's gross.
But it's beautiful when played well.
Yeah, it's very poignant.
Why is there a funeral dirge in this thing that's supposed to be about Bonaparte, who he admired at the time?
Yeah, so he originally dedicated this whole piece to Napoleon. And then when he found out Napoleon had declared himself the emperor or had himself crowned emperor, Beethoven was furious. He runs over to his manuscript and he scratches out the name Bonaparte and leaves a hole in the manuscript. So we actually still have that of the actual copy that has the hole right there. And he eventually just changes the name to Eroica, which means heroic, and to the memory of a great man.
It's the funeral of Napoleon's glory.
Well, I don't think so.
He wrote this, though, before that.
Oh, he wrote it before.
Yeah. It's the inevitable funeral for any heroic person.
Yeah, there's a story that says that when Beethoven lived to see Napoleon's death, from what I understand, and he said, well, he said that the second movement was written for that inevitable event.
It reminds me of the Siegfried funeral in Wagner. Bum 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 bum. It's got that same first three notes in that theme, and it's designed to sound sad. If you play the G and the C and the E flat, these are the Platonic forms of music. You play these things and they have effects.
What does sad sound like, though?
That's what it sounds like.
But why? But
sad.
how? I mean, I know that.
Is it cultural or is it universal? That's
a good question. It's hard to say.
If somebody in Kyoto, Japan in 1631, if they heard that chord, would they just cry? I mean,
in the church where I go, we occasionally sing some Eastern music, some Greek music. Well, I throw the Greek music in. It doesn't quite sound like that. It's not quite on the Western diatonic scale. There's still fifths and octaves. But still, those minor thirds are still what you do for the sad bits. When you get into Lent, you're going to do a lot of them. You're going to do Plagal 2, Greek tone, for any of you out there who know what I'm talking about. It's got a bunch of that stuff in it.
Play as a major third and then a minor third there, Michelle.
So here we are. I'm going to just lower that and everyone's going to get sad.
Yeah, you just take that third.
I'm crying.
So you got do, re, mi, and you take the mi part down a half step, and then everybody's sad.
Isn't that the Darth Vader theme? Bum ba-dum, bum ba-dum, bum
it's definitely a minor. You definitely can hear echoes of Beethoven in Star Wars.
John Williams is a crook. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, totally. But he ripped off Dvorak, Stravinsky,
And he's great.
He stole from good people.
He is great.
So this supports my thought that this is rampant Platonism. When you make a movie and you want people to feel a certain way, you have to play the music that makes them feel a certain way. You can't say, well, I'm going to play a polka here at the sad part.
So is that okay, or is that rhetoric? Like, you're yanking these people around and you're trying to instill an emotional state in them that they wouldn't have had otherwise. I mean, is that okay to do? Is that an ethical, just thing to do?
Well, that's another question.
Yeah.
But it's what they're doing.
It's definitely manipulative, right?
I think that's what upset Beethoven so much. He's like, he knew when he wrote this that this was a new thing. There are some letters that he wrote where he admitted that this was the most important thing he had done, at least at that point, and he understood it was something new and very good. And I think that he didn't want this to be propaganda for Napoleon. He's an Enlightenment guy, and he thought Napoleon was going to usher in an era of republicanism and humanism and abolish all the monarchies in Europe and change the political environment. And then when he didn't, I think he was probably, well, one, he was mad, and then later on he's probably like, I don't want him to use this for that purpose. didn't want him to use it as rhetoric or propaganda. Oh.
Funny story about the pipe organ, and then
I got a joke about piccolo players, so how about that?
Oh, no.
Well, so when you study Greek and Western Europe stuff, they always, like, Charlemagne shows up and they're making fun of him for being a barbarian, calling himself an emperor. Well, this is the story I heard, is there's a reason why the pipe organ is used in church music in the West. In the East, which no longer really exists, it was used for imperial music. If you went to the Imperial Hall in Constantinople to see the emperor, they'd lower him, I guess. They'd have, like, pipe organs playing. It'd be very impressive, and all the imperial robes and everything. It was designed to make the barbarians come in and say, wow. And so when Charlemagne gets crowned emperor, the emperor, Maurice, I think his name was, sends him an organ. Sends him, I don't know how you packed it up in those days, but send him an organ. And Charlemagne he's like, what is this? I don't know what this is. He's got some monks hanging around. Says, you guys, here you go. Have fun. And so that the music, which was all pomp and circumstance in the East, became church music. But it was the same thing back then. It was propaganda. Can you imagine if you were a Viking or something and you found your way to the imperial court in Constantinople and somebody's pumping bellows and making air go through big pipes, and the sound that you heard? It would be like, I don't know, landing in the middle of the Amazon with Led Zeppelin 1. What would people think?
Yeah, those organs, that they're like tuned for the building. It'd be like being inside the guitar, an acoustic guitar, when somebody's playing it, And then there's some of those pedal tones, those tones that are way down there. They're sub-audible, but you can feel them. Yeah, spooky, man.
When I go to a rock concert, I like to feel it right here, right in my sternum. I want that to be vibrating.
Tell us about the brown note, Michelle.
Oh, gosh.
The brown note?
This is back when South Park was really good.
It was before South Park, so there's an urban legend, right? That you've got your 6-string bass, or even your 7-string bass, and there's a note way down there, and you hit that, and just everybody loses control of their bowels.
Oh, South Park didn't make that up?
No.
Well, there's intervals that, decent people don't use.
Okay.
There are?
Right? Well, I don't know. The C to the F sharp, the tritone.
The tritone, uh-huh.
You're not supposed to use that. That's
well,
stupid.
No. Well, that's the thing, right? So supposedly that's considered the devil's interval.
Can you play a sample?
She wouldn't even play it for us.
No, it was this thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's the key to everything. Right? It's actually the magical trapdoor that can go in all these different directions, right? It's how the composer can get you from one place to another.
Yeah, but if you just hung out and left it there, that would be the devil's interval.
Yes.
It'd be like incomplete.
Then you're like Wagner. I will not resolve.
Is that what he sounds like? I see. So here are my questions. You get to be Beethoven here, Michelle. So he writes this thing, and he wants it to be a tribute to, or about, or dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's instrumental. There are no words or no lyrics. There's nothing to say in words here. How do you do that? Right? Like, how does one, I mean, we're not going to try to be Beethoven. Actually, I was messing with you. But if you want to write this piece and make it evocative of a person or a virtue, ode to joy, like, how does that artist take this sound thing, this oral thing, and make it evocative of a person, a virtue, joy, an emotional state? Like, they clearly do it, but the process whereby they do that is just magical and hidden from me.
Well, in this case, I think even Beethoven would say he purposefully tried to break with convention, right? So if you are being heroic, and maybe even Napoleon as an example, right? He's breaking convention, right? He's breaking down barriers. And that's what Beethoven is trying to do harmonically and expressively in this piece, right? So he is effective in doing that and showcasing that, right? I, as an artist, can break down these musical barriers just like, the hero in real life breaks down tyranny, You buying it?
Okay, but how? Yeah, sort of. Yeah, you brought up Wagner. That's kind of what the whole Ring is breaking the whole thing. How far can you go, though? So Beethoven's doing weird harmonic stuff to us and hitting us over the head, and it sounds heroic. To my ear, I'm going to place my flag in the ground right here. When you get to the early 20th century and somebody like Schoenberg, it's a bridge too far. It doesn't sound like anything to me.
Yeah, he breaks it. He breaks the system completely, right? He's not a reformer. He's just I'm going to tear it down.
Yeah.
A vandal.
Yeah.
A Visigoth. Yeah.
Is this the part of the show where we crap on Jackson Pollock? Because we have that in every show. I mean, no, it's part of the same movement, though, right?
Yeah. Dadaism and Schoenberg and Jackson Pollock and Picasso, in my opinion. You're pushing. It's what artists do. And I think what Michelle said, it's probably the reason, in order to mirror in the music what you're trying to express. Mm-hmm. But if you go too far, I think you lose the human.
Yeah, I would agree. But we can kind of blame Beethoven in a way, because he's sort of the first person who sells himself and establishes himself as the artist as hero. And the artist as like that itself is something to be celebrated in, right? He's the first tortured artist, really. I mean, Mozart to some extent, but Beethoven is really the one to kind of break free and be successful being the tortured artist who lives for his art and only does his art and doesn't compromise.
Yeah, in the Bugs Bunny cartoons, there's some where Bugs Bunny wears the tuxedo and tails. He's got the big white hair, and he pounds on the piano, and the hair is all flying around. It's Beethoven, right? I mean, it's a caricature of him. Like, he's kind of a early rock star. I still don't know. I would like to know more about the inner workings of the mind of somebody who's going to create something that's all sound, that is evocative of something that is an entirely different sense experience. Great artists do it all the time, and it's just inexplicable to me. I hear what you say about him, breaking these conventions, and his hopes that Napoleon would break these conventions and monarchies and make Europe republican in terms of system of government, not party. But I listen to the music, and I hear some things in there that I associate with Napoleon. There's some sort of martial themes, some sort of military, there are little military music themes. It'd just be like 6 beats of it or something here and there in these different movements. The third movement after the funeral is celebratory and light. He had things to celebrate about. Napoleon did. He liberated some people, only to then subjugate them later. The thing is evocative of him, but I don't know how he does it. I can't tell you why.
I have a theory. I just came up with it. Can I hit you guys with it? For you, Scott, the music is kind of a mystery. And what I'm thinking of is, so before, and what Michelle said about Beethoven being the tortured artist, well, what's the non-tortured artist? Let's go back 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, and what you have is church composers. And I have been a cantor myself for a long time, where what I'm doing is I'm filling space with sound. I'm filling space and time with sound. And nobody's paying that much attention, I'm in the right tone, I'm singing the music. And so you get into the mode of being able to create a lot of, it's kind of like making shoes, or doing a vamp in the coffee house. Okay, so making sound is one thing. And then what the artists do and what Beethoven starts to do, well, I'm not going to do what you think I'm going to do. I'm not going to just produce music for the church service. I'm going to, what if I did this? Right? And I remember I went to a doctoral dissertation once. The guy was arguing that there was a dispute in the church, in the Catholic Church, about whether to allow polyphony. Because it was too weird.
It's distracting, yeah.
Yeah, and his argument was they made the wrong choice. But it's a bunch of people just putting the chants through for the liturgy, and then, well, how about if you do this at this time and I do it at this time? We do an alternate line here and another line here, and we'll make something really neat. So it's taking the form that already exists and breaking it. So it's not out of zero. It's not out of nowhere. It's out of somewhere. that working musicians have been doing forever. You know, the working musician who has to earn a paycheck and has to produce sound for somebody's wedding or something. Like, there's a scene in the movie that Clint Eastwood did about Charlie Parker of when they had a gig playing at a bar mitzvah. Because Red Rodney, the trumpet player, was Jewish, and so he hired... And apparently this really happened. Charlie Parker was playing at some kid's bar mitzvah. Can you imagine? That's a lucky kid. What do you think of my theory? Am I completely wrong?
No, I mean, the working musician has to create... No, they don't have to. But there's going to be an impulse to create something new and do something different and, you know, break down a barrier to introduce polyphony into the liturgy or whatever. And then, like you say, it could be taken too far and you end up with Schoenberg. Like, what's he going to do? If he's going to do something new and original, what's he going to do?
Go back to tonality.
That'd be nice. Yeah, we'll have to wait 30 more years for that. 40, 50 more years for that to happen, probably.
So there's this character on the scene nowadays named Jacob Collier. Have you guys heard of this guy?
I have not. I'm going to write down the name.
So he's from England, London, and he is doing some really interesting experimental stuff that when you listen to it, you know, if you like jazz and if you like kind of pop music with some nice jazz chords, you might just think, oh, that's cool. And then you dig a little bit deeper into what he's doing, and he is actually taking the notions of Western harmony to its outer limits without breaking it. So without having to go down the Schoenberg 12-tone rat hole. And he has this arrangement where by exploiting the difference between mean tuning, is this too nerdy?
I'm sorry. I knew I liked you. You said Schoenberg 12-tone rat hole. I'm like, thumbs up.
Well, who wants to listen to that? It's awful, right? So
nobody ever does.
There's no way you're going to get any joy out of or satisfaction listening to that stuff. So in his arrangements, he's exploiting the difference between mean tuning, like the way pianos are tuned, and true tuning, like sort of Pythagorean tuning, to where he ends up modulating to a key that you can call G half sharp major. It's in between.
Wow.
You don't know that it's happening until you've arrived there, and it's makes sense and it's perfect and it's beautiful. And the reason why is that he's just going for maximum brightness. So what's the brightest way that you can tune a chord within sort of our Western notions of tuning?
That is another thing to talk about.
Jacob Collier?
Jacob Collier. And his music is jazz. A lot of times he'll take a pop song and just reharmonize the crap out of it and make it really interesting.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check that out. The tuning is a math problem, Scott, so you might like that. Well, if we base our scale off octaves and fifths and you tune your piano by going through that cycle, you end up back where you start, but not quite. You have a little bit of leftover slop in your scale. And so what the modern piano does is just evenly divide it. That's equal temperament. So every key on the piano is slightly out of tune. And we don't notice because it's just a little out of tune. But then you hear something that's actually in tune. And it sounds different.
Sometimes it sounds too
I'm going to check
perfect.
that out as soon as we're done. Yeah. Should we look at the Heiligenstadt Testament?
That's what I got in my hand. Poor Beethoven.
So what's the story behind this? This is 1802 or so?
Yeah. So Beethoven, he knows there's something wrong with his hearing, and he finds this doctor, and the doctor says, hey, just go out to the country and just don't listen to anything for a while, and maybe that will hear you. Like, just be around silence. And so he goes and he kind of secludes himself, and he writes this letter to his brothers that was only found actually after he died, but he wrote it to them. And it's where he's basically realizing this is not going to work. I'm not going to get any better. So it's kind of his to be or not to be moment, right? Yeah. Am I going to continue knowing that this is my fate? And, if so, why would I do that? Why go on living?
Yeah. So if you are, and you are, the greatest thing musically since sliced bread, but now you're losing your ears. You're losing your hearing. It's the one thing you can really do.
Right. Imagine, that would be like being trapped in your mind, right? As a musician, when that's all you have left.
He starts off, for my brothers, Karl and Johann Beethoven. And it's a letter to them that he just kind of put in the drawer and shut and didn't send away. He probably should have sent to them, poor guy. I think Karl eventually got to read it, but I'm not sure of that. But he starts off essentially apologizing. He says, "You'll probably think I'm rude, but I'm not. I can't hear." And he says, "How could I proclaim the deficiency of a sense which ought to have been more perfect with me than with other men?" Like, he's ashamed that he can't hear. He thinks that because he's a composer, that if, one, he should hear better. And he also thinks that if people find out he can't hear, maybe he won't be able to work again, that he'll be ostracized, that they'll think he's a freak. He has a great deal of shame about it. It's very sad. He talks about his art and his virtue are the only things that kept him essentially from killing himself. Bad deal.
Yeah, so I want to read a little bit right from the middle. In his day, a musician had to work with patronage. You had to have somebody pay. So I imagine you had to hobnob. Is that the right word?
Yes. You have to be in society, right?
And if you're deaf, how do you do it? So right in the middle, he says, "What a humiliation when one stood beside me and heard a flute in the distance, and I heard nothing. Or someone heard the shepherd singing, and again I heard nothing. Such incidents brought me to the verge of despair, but little more, and I would have put an end to my life. Only art it was that withheld me. It seemed impossible to leave the world until I had produced all that I have felt called upon me to produce, and so I endured this wretched existence." So he's thinking of doing whatever they did in 1802 to kill themselves, because he can't hear, he can't talk to his patrons. He's afraid they're going to find out. What keeps him from doing it? He's Beethoven. I don't think he's written any of the symphonies yet, maybe one.
I think he's written the first two, right?
Yeah.
So the Eroica comes out after this period.
So I think I'm up to Opus 83 right now. I've been listening to all the opuses, the opera of Beethoven in order. And before this letter, it's good, but it starts to get really good. As his hearing goes away, it gets better and better and better. And all of the great stuff, like 136, that the C-sharp minor string quartet, it's so good. And he never heard that thing. Not a bit. He had so much left in him that you talk about tortured artist, but he was a tortured artist. And the thing is, he was right. This is not Jim Morrison of the Doors, who I have a grudge against, thinking that he's a great poet. He wasn't. Beethoven really was Beethoven. And all that kept him from dying is the thought of all of the stuff that he could still do. It's rough.
Did you know that Jim Morrison's dad was the rear admiral in charge of the Pacific Fleet during the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
I did not.
How does that work?
I don't know. I listened to that Lizard King album. I'm the Lizard King. I can do anything. It ain't Beethoven.
I'm going to say this again. His dad was the rear admiral in charge of all that during the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Okay. What connection are you making?
Tinfoil
Yeah,
moment?
what the hell's going on? What the hell's going on? What are the chances that his kid, who's kind of a mediocrity, fight me, gets a record deal, and, he's subversive, promotes drug culture, et cetera, et cetera. What are the chances of that?
You saying he wasn't tortured?
Oh, he might have been tortured, like literally. No, it's just too weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to go back to my friend Beethoven, because Jim Morrison, I have decided, is not my friend. But I love this line. He said, "Forced already in my 28th year to become a philosopher."
And then he says something funny like, "That's especially hard for artists." Right? He says, "Oh, it's not easy, and for the artist, much more difficult than for anyone else." Like, what does that mean?
Well, to be a philosopher is like, I think they mean like the Stoics or like Socrates, to accept death, and like Socrates in the Phaedo. There's a line from Shakespeare, I think it's in Much Ado About Nothing, never was philosopher born who could withstand a toothache. The idea being philosophy means I'm not affected by the things in my life. And so he's forced to be a philosopher because he's going deaf. But it's even harder for the artist because I guess for him, the artist is about feeling.
Nice.
And so he has to be insensible to feelings. He thinks it's going to hurt his art.
Or does that mean, or does that just mean it makes him hyper rational?
Well, I don't know that he succeeded because the music's so passionate after this. But he managed not to kill himself.
He says, it was virtue alone which sustained me in my misery. I have to thank her and art for not having ended my life by suicide. Recommend virtue to your children, he says.
What's funny, here's my tinfoil moment, is that...
Come on in, the water's fine.
This particular section of the letter is sometimes left out. The part where he says, recommend virtue to your children. It alone, not money, can make them happy. I speak from experience. This is what upheld me in my time of misery. Right. That little section right there. So I have a textbook from my undergraduate days, and it's all primary source documents, like through the history of Western music. And so it had the Heiligenstadt Testament in it. I'm like, great, I have it. And I looked at it and I read it and I go, I want to check out some other translations. So I go onto the interwebs and I found some other versions, and there's this extra paragraph. I'm like, why is this not in my textbook? And maybe that's just my little tinfoil moment, but and if you look on different websites, some of them have it and some of them don't.
Yeah, so it's Jim Morrison, Gulf of Tonkin, and recommend virtue to your children. They're all connected. You see? This is great. Yeah, so I like Beethoven a lot. There's other composers that I like a lot too. I don't know if I could pick a favorite, but for me, I think this is what the internet is for. Okay? The internet is a problematic medium. But, when I was a kid, so my dad, who occasionally listens to this podcast, I have to thank him. He had a collection of classical music. It's like a Time Life series on vinyl. Like, here's Tchaikovsky, here's Beethoven, here's Mozart, and I would sit up and listen to it. But I didn't have the complete works. I couldn't just go dig out whatever I wanted. I could go to the library and see what they had, but they didn't have much in Frankfort, Illinois. But the entirety of his works, almost everything he ever did, is available instantly. There is so much good art and beauty and literature and music available to us instantly. But I suppose we better go check Facebook, Mm-hmm. So I would say if you're at all intrigued by this, any of you who are still listening to us, dear listener, this is what you use it for. You're paying for internet. This is what it's for. Fill your life with beauty.
I went and found scores for this. The music, the sheet music. And, that's just available for free on the internet. So I downloaded the 4 PDFs of each of the 4 movements and followed along as best I could. It's hard to follow the first movement. Whew, it's flying. It's just flying. It's hard to follow. But, I couldn't have done that. 25 years ago, I bought a copy of Norton's scores. What is it? Norton Anthology Scores for Listening or whatever. You'd had to go pay. I paid a lot of money for those things. I probably paid $70 for those 2 volumes, 25, 30 years ago. And now you can find everything for free. The scores for everything on the internet. And even if you can't read music, you can see the direction. You can see it's up and down, when it speeds up, when it's silent, what horns are playing, what horns aren't. And I think looking at the score, even if you don't read music, can be an aid when you listen to this stuff. It can also be frustrating. Just don't get too hung up with it.
Yeah, I think it's worth your time. I think taking piano lessons, even if you're an adult, or some sort of musical instrument for 3 months, your understanding and enjoyment of music would go up 90%.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't have to be great, but just knowing what a scale is and knowing this, like just the shape. If you look at a piano keyboard, you can see the shape of the music. You can see like where the black keys and the white keys are.
It's a musical abacus.
It is, but I got another example. So my wife knows all sorts of colors.
All chicks do.
Like chartreuse.
Right. You're like, what are you talking about?
And periwinkle.
What do you mean?
And I don't ever see them.
What's periwinkle, Michelle?
You know, I see red and blue and green.
What's periwinkle?
I don't know. I think it's like a purpley blue.
All right,
maybe?
I know that one.
I don't know.
I have to believe she actually sees them. And so her color palette's bigger than mine. She can see things better than I can see. You study a little bit of music, you can hear things that you couldn't hear before.
That's absolutely true. Yes. So there even is this whole thing called ear training, right? So for you in your strength training, you can train your ears. And when I first heard that, you know, in my youth, I was like, that's ridiculous. I can hear what I hear, and how's that going to get any better? And you can absolutely learn to hear more. And it is like, you're hearing music in full color instead of in black and white.
Yeah, I took some of those perfect pitch courses, where you hear the color, they relate the pitches to color.
It's not about perfect pitch.
But Karl's like, that's a major seventh, right? And you're like,
Yeah, that's ear training.
It's not ear training. It's irritating.
Well, but no, I mean, but...
Perfect pitch is really irritating.
But it's also not terribly helpful.
The door squeaks and somebody says F sharp.
Shut up. I was in the University of Tulsa marching band. We had band practice one day. There were like 4 guys in the stands with leaf blowers blowing all the trash up in the corner to gather it up. And the whole marching band just hit that. I think it was a C sharp. And then we finally got loud enough that they could hear us. And they all turned them all off. We were just like droning like bagpipes behind them. Yeah, you start hearing it everywhere. I have a report to give, Karl.
Yes.
You want to see my new phone?
Sure. I have one more thing to hassle Michelle with.
Do it, and then we'll do a product review.
So, when I found out we had you amongst our OGB thing, I found that there are recordings of you
at michellehawkins.com.
Good Lord.
And I listened to it, and I liked it, and I thought, when will we hear more? When's the EP release party?
Oh, gosh.
There's some jazzy stuff. It was very cool. I liked it.
Yeah, so I'm primarily a jazz musician. That's my passion, and so that's what that is. I'm not currently working on an album. I'm homeschooling my kids, so that keeps me pretty darn busy.
Yeah,
that's good work. Thanks for doing that.
I get it.
Thanks for doing that. That'll be just a few.
Well, you are recommending virtue to your children. It alone can give happiness, not money, right? Like Beethoven said.
Man, I am trying, but
How old
is
are they?
Hard. They are 10 and 13.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying they're not good kids. They're great kids, but man,
they lack in virtue. Is that what you're saying?
No. Just this the culture that we're in today makes it a challenge to stay grounded. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Well, hey, thanks for homeschooling those. But you can go check out Michelle at michellehawkins.com. And Karl, Michelle's going to be running a little session on listening to classical music and a discussion of those works that she has selected with our existing OGB members. We're going to probably open the enrollment for that thing probably next week.
Ooh.
Right. And we're going to kick that off a little pilot program, see how that flies, and learn how to do that. I don't think either one of us really know how to best do that in an online environment. Hopefully we'll expand that program where we listen to important things and then discuss them in a seminar environment, just like it was one of our books. So maybe this was the alpha test right here today, maybe. And then we'll be doing the beta here very soon. Thanks for taking that risk with us, Michelle.
Well, I'm thrilled. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And I'm super excited about just what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. It's what we need.
Oh, it's what we're doing now. You're going down with us.
I'm in. Scott, he sent me a message saying, hey, I got an idea. And I didn't care what it was. I said, I'm in, whatever it is, because I just love what you're doing. I love what you're about.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I got a new phone. And I think everybody needs one. It's the light phone.
How do you play videos on that? How do you go to Facebook?
It's called Light Phone, Light. It's a Light Phone 2, actually. It has an e-ink screen like your Kindle Paperwhite or your Kindle, what is the new one, Voyager? I don't know. So it has a touch screen, so you can touch it and stuff happens. It's pretty slow, which is actually good. At first it was frustrating to me, but then I realized, it makes me think about getting in a big, long text thread with people. So it'll call, and then I have a little keyboard, and I can text. And I can do group text.
And nothing else.
And it has a phone book, not an address book, a phone book. That's it. My sister calls it my jitterbug. You know, there used to be those phones for kids that had like a grandma number, a mom number, a dad number, and like the police. That's they call it the jitterbug. And I had turned on the screen time app thing on my iPhone. So on Sundays, it would tell me how much time I had spent on that phone during the week. And this has cut it by about 70%.
That's very good.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I still have my iPhone, and it's an iPod at this point.
Hey, I have a request from our jazz musician here. At some point, we should do something similar. Intro to jazz.
Now we're talking.
Just a podcast for the listener who says, that stuff's weird. You know, what is it? How do you listen to it? How do we make it go from randomness to sounding good?
Mm-hmm. Well, and to be fair, there's a time period that's optimal, and then there's a place where they jump the shark, like they go Schoenberg on you. So
that would be around 1967. I'm saying,
don't say Coltrane.
I was saying Bitches Brew, Miles Davis. I hate that album. I have it because it's Miles. I can't listen to it. Well, I don't know. We ought to save this probably for that podcast. But
if you guys go to, we'll wrap this thing up. But if you're interested in hearing a little Michelle's work, go to michellehawkins.com. If you think you might want to learn a little bit more about classical music and get in some of those discussions, think about maybe joining us at Online Great Books. We're going to open enrollment again on February 14th, 2019. That's the next kickoff. So if you want to get a heads up on that, you can go to onlinegreatbooks.com/OGB podcast. You get on the list and we'll let you know when that's opening up. And then once you're in, you might get a slot at one of Michelle's seminars. And if you're interested in that jazz thing, I do a little thing once a year every now and then, Karl. On the Barbell Logic podcast, I do a little Christmas special where it's just me and I play 4 or 5 or 8 of my favorite jazz tunes and do a little running commentary and try to do a little of what you're talking about and tell people why the songs are important, what's interesting in them, and what they might be listening for when they hear some of that good stuff, because I don't pick any bad stuff. Yeah,
right.
They're the Christmas specials at the Barbell Logic podcast. Come for the barbells and get me yelling about culture and maybe some commentary on Miles Davis and so on. So there's another Online Great Books podcast. Send any questions you may have or books that you want us to talk about or whatever to podcast at onlinegreatbooks.com, and then we will ignore that email and do whatever we want anyway. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you in another week.